Next order of business is the roll call of members. Please indicate your presence when the machine is open. If all the members voted, tally the roll.
Hey there, welcome to Sessions. Blake Johnson. I've got my host, Earl Harris Jr., and we're excited to be back. We've got a great guest today, a high-profile, high-power broker of information and influence in the state legislature. She was first elected in 2016, District 87. She's previously served in the environmental industry for almost 3 decades. Most recently, I think, before going full-time in this role, was an executive at a climate tech company.
That's right. Yep.
Okay, so this is Carey Hamilton. She's been on before, but now in video in full color. And so we're here to chat today about the happenings this week and also a variety of issues. Carey, thanks for coming on again, and this time with lights.
My pleasure. Glad to be here. Thanks, gentlemen.
Well, tell us first, we did this, I think, when it was just the audio version, but we've got way more viewers now that I'm not the only person in charge.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Earl.
Tell
us about your journey to the legislature. I mean, you coming in 2016 is an interesting time to have started, and just kind of give us the rundown. Who's Carey Hamilton?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. So I pretty much grew up in Indianapolis, Northwest
No relation
side.
to the Broadway Hamilton, though?
No relation to Broadway Hamilton.
Okay, just making sure.
Or the former mayor of Bloomington.
We like to fact
or
check.
the former congressman from Southern Indiana,
Okay,
although I admire those
just
gentlemen
okay.
greatly.
There goes the sing-along part of the show.
Darn it.
Don't cue the number.
As you mentioned, my professional background is in environmental policy, primarily with some corporate, some nonprofit executive work, and some government work as well. And I really came to that field from a human health and economic perspective. So toxic exposures causing cancer and all kinds of other issues for human beings, and realizing that we could mitigate that and do better. And it's good for the economy as well when we're smarter about how we manage resources in our economy. And then I spent 10 years in the circular economy space, so working to improve recycling and waste reduction and reuse. And that was also very much a big economy job in Indiana, running a statewide organization in Indiana, because we're a manufacturing state. So those manufacturers, we have a big footprint in glass, paper, plastic, aluminum, steel manufacturing. And those manufacturers want more recycled content to make new products because they save on energy inputs and resource inputs. And so that work kind of exposed me to the Statehouse. I started to work on policy to advance the circular economy in Indiana with those manufacturers behind me supporting that work of our organization. And it was just incredibly inspiring work to be able to bring a powerful economic message to something that helps the environment and reduces harmful impacts from toxic emissions, et cetera, to Hoosiers. And in a state with a lot of toxic emissions, that was it's important work. So that exposure to the Statehouse kind of brought me deeper into public policy more broadly, and then eventually in 2016, I had an opportunity to run for the Statehouse, and here I am.
Very good. We're glad you're here.
We are glad you're here. You and I were elected the same year.
We were.
So we're both 9 years
Yeah,
in.
we were freshmen together.
A much younger member. Sorry, I over here.
Yeah, but you look a lot older than us. Okay, so anyway. So let's talk about your position with the House Democrats. You're actually in top 3 leadership.
I am.
You are the caucus chair. For those out there, because we try to pull back the veil of what goes on at the State House. What does that mean?
That means, so as you mentioned, there are 3 elected leadership positions within House Democrats. And as caucus chair, my role is to work with that team to kind of, we sit down together every week during session and talk about what big issues might be in front of us that we need to talk about when we're all together as a group. And then as caucus chair, I try to lead our caucus meetings, which is
Does that
sort
really
of
mean
like
babysit us?
babysitting, herding cats, what have you. We're a bunch of smart, passionate people working on issues, and we get in a room to talk about the bills we're about to vote on and share expertise, leaders on committees sharing what they know about specific bills, and trying to, make that conversation work well for everyone and be efficient with our time because we're always in a rush. That's a chunk of it. And then just sort of some of the nuts and bolts of the caucus managing the operation, if you will.
Caucus is a fancy word for all the Democrats.
That's right. That's right. That's
Which
right.
is a small number.
Yeah.
And I will share another piece. So I've been in this role now. I've just started my third year, so my second term as caucus chair. And so last year was the first election year since I've been in this role. And I decided to kind of expand it as I left the corporate sector and had a little more time and really wanted to focus on helping us grow our caucus. And I think moving forward, that will, as long as I'm in this role, will be a key part of it as well. That's the political side of the caucus, which we're not talking about so much today, but that is part of the role.
So one of the things I also want to point out about you, and you kind of talked about your history, is you do walk it like you talk it. I noticed you do drive a cool electric Ford Mach. You haven't given me a ride yet. And you also have, instead of taking the elevator, and you've made me walk with you before, you are a stair taker at the State House.
Yeah, I am.
So let's get into a little bit of, let's jump into some policy. I know
She's also making us use less lights today.
I know. Well, there's some candles that the viewers don't see on.
We put a solar panel up top, and that's the only way we're getting to do this show today.
And
Yeah.
we had to pedal for like an hour. to
Yeah,
do
you
it.
guys did a
there's
great
actually
job.
a guy on a
Thank
bicycle
you.
powering the cameras.
Right.
This is the weirdest episode we've ever had. Yeah,
We are a zero emission
That's
set
right,
right now.
Exactly.
I love it.
If it goes dark, it means he's fainted.
yeah, that's right.
So
Sorry, Jacob.
It's all right. So let's get into some policy. You are a mom.
I am a mom.
And I know that you have a great interest in, as Blake is a father, I know you have some great interest in childcare. Talk to us about some initiatives you're working on in that arena.
Yeah, thank you. So, back when my kids were young and I was working and my husband was working and we were trying to figure out childcare, it was not easy back then, and we had the resources, and it was still challenging. Today, it's much worse for Hoosier families. We have a true crisis in Indiana. We've known this for several years, but just this past summer, the State Chamber of Commerce came out with a new study that showed our Hoosier economy is losing $4.2 billion every year because of lack of access to childcare. Affordable childcare. And we know that because employers are struggling to bring folks in and families who would like to work but don't have that resource for their children. And it's a big drain, obviously, on our economy, but it hurts our families. So this is an opportunity. This is a challenge for our state that the legislature has to help solve. The free market is not solving it for us. And what we're seeing across the country is states stepping up to provide support, to build out more infrastructure, to make it more affordable. There are a variety of different policy tools to do that. If you want to get into that, I can talk about that a little bit. But we have to really step up, and so far we haven't. And I'm hoping this year in a budget year, we can start to make some progress.
So right now, the speaker has said, and this is why I filed my bill, which we know about too, that the state at this point doesn't see pre-K at least as their responsibility, right? So, my bill, which we've talked about, was giving the counties an opportunity to say that it will be their priority, and they'll have to find a way to pay for it, but give them the tool to do so. What else is kind of on the docket that you're thinking could be a way to get there?
Well, let's talk about that a little more. So pre-K I think that's the low-hanging fruit. So we've our business communities come together for years to support pre-K for all, and that means we have our 4-year-olds have access to high-quality early learning. That solves the child care crisis starting when your kids hit 4.
Yeah.
So that's a big chunk of the child care crisis. And we know that that investment in pre-K pays off many times over for us as taxpayers. Kids get a better start. Some kids come into pre-K or kindergarten when they don't have exposure to pre-K, and this is the challenge, right? They come into kindergarten, they've never held a pencil or a crayon. They don't know their numbers. They haven't really been in social environments with other kids. And so they have a big learning curve. When pre-K is provided to all children, they have that those exposures earlier before coming into kindergarten and beyond, and that helps them succeed.
Well, it's true of also just regular early, like any kind of early
that's
child. I mean,
right.
my kid he's 16 months. He goes to early child education. He comes home and is doing things. I'm like, where did you learn that? Is Miss Dina? Is Miss Dina doing all this? Like,
Isn't it amazing?
It's incredible. Yeah. And so that's not even at 3 or 4 years old. That's at 16 months. The foundation that he's laying by being in that environment.
That's
and
right.
we're lucky because we can afford to do it. It's still incredibly expensive, but like we're able to do it. It's remarkable though that if you don't have that framework and that foundation, you really are starting with an anchor around your neck.
Yeah. I think as the legislature, one of our key jobs is to make sure every Hoosier child, everyone born in Indiana, has a chance to thrive. And so when we think about public policy, I think it needs to be cradle to career. And that starts with, high quality childcare and pre-K for all. And I have to mention the really sobering statistic that Indiana is one of only 6 states that doesn't significantly invest in pre-K. One of only 6 states. That's not good.
Yeah.
I worked in public education for a long time, and we were pushing for kindergarten. But the reality of the conversations that took place is get the child. I mean, your son's a perfect example. Get kids learning as soon as possible because they can. Obviously, they can. And so anything you can do to start that process for their brains to develop, and also the socialization.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
if you have a second child on the way, but right now,
Spoiler alert.
Lynn.
What?
Oh, sorry, was I not supposed to say?
No, it's all good.
Right now, Lynn is an only child.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up an only child, but I was lucky enough to have cousins next door and all around and family members, but sometimes that socialization doesn't happen depending on what your family structure is.
Right, and if Len were just around Natalie and I, the words he'd be learning would not be quite what we're looking for. Definitely more interested in what childcare provides.
So it's vital that we do what we can to get our young babies educated at an early age. I'm glad you're focusing on that.
Thank you.
Let's shift gears to something else. I made a reference how you have made me walk the stairs with you. You are a big person in terms of walking, in terms of trails. You actually started a Trail Caucus.
Yeah.
Give us some background.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of go way back quickly. When I was in middle school, I was at the summer camp, and it was like 20 kids and a lady with a little old beat-up bus, and she'd drive us around. It was just day camp. But she took us one day to McCormick's Creek State Park, Miss Brannigan, McCormick's Creek State Park, and would let us loose. Just, free range kids. And so I was with 2 friends, and we had like 3 hours to run around the park. And we ran up and down the creek and up and down trails and picked up a rock, and there was a little snake. The first time I saw a snake in the wilderness, in the wild, and splashed and got muddy and had a blast and kind of fell in love with the outdoors that day. Mm-hmm. I fell in love with I fell in love with the outdoors that day. And then jump ahead, I was just out of college working in state government, my first job at the Department of Environmental Management. And I learned about the Appalachian Trail. And I'd never hiked and backpacked overnight. I had done day hikes at that point out west and some fun day adventures. But I read this book about a woman who, at the age of 50, and here I was 25, she was 50, she quit her job, newly empty nester, newly divorced, and hiked from Georgia to Maine, and wrote this book. And I thought, and it was like very practical, like how do you do this, and what was the day in the life of? And I thought, oh my gosh, I could do that, and that's so exciting, and how empowering, and a great physical and mental and emotional challenge. And so I quit my job and hiked from Georgia to Maine.
Wow. I did not
I
know that.
know
You didn't know that?
No, TLDR.
New fact.
Give us the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was just incredibly fortunate.
By yourself?
By myself. I started out by myself, but because of the book, I knew I would meet this trail community.
Sure.
And that a lot of people that hike from Georgia to Maine every year, through hikers that hike the whole trail, they start in the spring, they end in the fall. It's a lot of new college grads or young professionals. It's also a lot of newly retired folks.
Sure.
And that there was a community. So I felt confident that I would be part of this community based on what I'd read, and started out by myself. My dad drove me down to Georgia, dropped me off on the top of Springer Mountain. And
Did he have any protest to this?
a little bit. He had 2 things he kind of left me with. One was he made me carry an old cell phone when it was early days in cell phones.
Sure.
But it was buried in the bottom of my backpack, and I would ship my charger ahead in a little box of supplies and charge it every couple of weeks. That was his little made him feel a little better about it. But he also, when he dropped me off on the trail, he decided my nickname, because everybody has a trail name. Sure. And this one did not stick, by the way, but he called me Bear Bait.
I see that coming up.
Congratulations on giving that up. Giving that to us. We will be using that.
No. He has a sense of humor. I think that was his way of rationalizing some part of his brain. Haha.
Representative Bear Bait, would you please?
I actually had a different trail name, which we will not talk about today. But anyway, the point of that experience was...
We'll share it on the TikTok.
So all of the kind of... the reality of outdoor recreation as an industry, as an opportunity for people to expand their horizons, and trails, all of that kind of became important to me in my life. And then as I kind of went back to my career after that, back to the real world, and started thinking more about public policy, before I got into the circular economy space, I spent time and energy learning about the built environment and in our communities. And I know you work a lot on safe communities, walking, biking, et cetera, intersections, and that very much overlaps with the trails work in the legislature. So soon after we were elected, I realized there was kind of a void of leadership in this space, and it was also potentially very bipartisan. So I first crafted it sort of started with crafting legislation, the first bill I passed, which was, you may remember this, to create immunity for property owners along trails. And there's a powerful little story here. So my district at the time included the Monon Trail in Indianapolis. Now I go just almost to it, but before redistricting. And there was a neighborhood along the Monon Trail on the north side of Indianapolis, near Nora. And there was someone who was being a good neighbor, created a path to the Monon Trail through their property to be a nice neighbor, because there was no safe way to get to the trail. Otherwise, you had to go out on a busy road to get around to the trail. And then suddenly the city was doing a project to update the trail, which was good. And they said to all the property owners, by the way, you have to buy liability insurance if you're going to have access to the trail. So I thought, boy, it just doesn't make sense to penalize these folks, make them buy insurance for the privilege of being good neighbors, right? So
no good deed.
So it goes unpunished, right? So I passed legislation to create immunity for property owners along trails. And then within a few months of the legislation passing, I had a couple of different developers reach out to me and say, that's incredibly helpful legislation. You're speeding along some new projects we have on some new trails in Indiana. Thank you. I thought, wow, how cool is that? Soon thereafter, I got to know the Indiana Greenways Foundation, and they had the idea of creating a Trails Caucus. They sent out an email to their members and said, hey, well, it happened to be January of 2020. I was sitting in the House chamber waiting for us to start business, checking out my email, catching up, opened this email. It said something about Trails Caucus, and within 20 seconds, I was talking to their executive director, and a couple of weeks later, we launched the Trails Caucus. Yeah. And we did. And we've created the first ever legislatively designated trail funding in the state. Yeah. $90 million over the last two budgets.
So I have walked on trails, but one of the other things I want to point out, because I love bike riding.
You love bike riding, I know.
You can ride on trails too.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
It fits on both sides of that. That's a perfect example of you living it as you do it and having those conversations with people, and it led to legislation, and it led to helping people, helping development, et cetera. So
but also, isn't it great when what you actually care about gets to line up to a public policy
it's
agenda?
So awesome,
right? And it doesn't happen all the time. I mean, you get assigned to committees, and maybe you don't necessarily have an interest, and then you find your way into some expertise, but you're getting to kind of live out.
One of the cool things about our citizen legislature is we all bring our lived experiences, and in the short amount of time we're in the building every year, well, not that short sometimes.
Feels like an eternity sometimes.
It certainly does. But we bring those lived experiences and do good things.
Let's pivot a little bit just to kind of what's happening right now in the legislature. We've got the budget is starting, conversations are starting to move. Obviously, there's been hearings. You guys are probably read into that maybe more than I am, because I'm on public policy and local government, and we just haven't seen any of it yet. But kind of what's your impression of session so far? We've got a new administration. We've had the state of the state. Any takeaways?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of a big year because of the new administration, right? I mean, since we've been in office, we've had the same governor, and so the new administration, Governor Braun's administration, comes in with almost no time to craft a budget. So they put something together pretty quickly, right? It has some things that have us nervous, but I think the conversations really kind of start then with our colleagues in the House, with the Senate, but also with the administration as time unfolds. I was concerned. The Trails money was zeroed out from $30 million in the last budget to zero now, and I'm hopeful we can put some money there. We do have a tighter fiscal situation than we've seen.
Any trails in Jasper we can talk about? I mean, that might help.
Yeah.
With
Yep,
Jasper
yep,
Trails.
yep, yep. That conversation is in progress.
The inside.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Yes. Yeah. And in Hendricks County. Yeah. So, I think across the board, we're going to have to be really savvy and efficient with our dollars. And,
Well, and part of the process is, you were on Ways and Means, I'm on Ways and Means, is you have people that come and testify to talk about here's stuff that's important. And I know people sometimes think it's only healthcare, it's only roads, it's only those type of things, but that is part of healthcare, that's part of environmental, that's part of fun living is what you can do outside. We don't want to spend all of our time inside, and there needs to be things that you can do outside to enjoy life here as a Hoosier.
yeah.
So that's part of, I know that we had some people that talked about good outdoor living as part of the budget and making that in. So hopefully we can get it in. And I think you pointed out something that in conversation with the governor has commented that there's some things that are at the start point, and then let's see where we go.
Yeah, exactly.
What other environmental things are you working on?
Oh, well, since you asked, for the last 5 years, I've had a conversation about, it's been in the form of a bill for 5 years to create a committee on climate resilience and economic growth. And it kind of harkens back, so some of the genesis of it harkens back to my experience working with industry in Indiana. So big manufacturing state, the economy's changing rapidly, decarbonizing, which creates new business opportunities. And also, so there's this economic opportunity bucket around how our economy works and make sure we're grabbing these changes in the economy and leveraging them for our benefit as a state. And then there's the risk of not being prepared for the changing climate. Climate scientists out of Purdue and elsewhere tell us that Indiana is relatively, compared to, say, the coasts with storm challenges and fires, et cetera, relatively immune to major climate impact. But we still do have threats to the ag sector from times of more intense heat and dryness and then more intense rain that's not helpful, like the imbalance to the ag sector, risks to our communities from major flood events. So we have to be, I think it's incumbent upon us to be focused on resilient communities. So I've had this bill, and I will say one good thing that came out of the original iteration of my bill was a focus on the auto sector. So the next year after my first iteration, working with United Auto Workers in particular, I worked with my colleague, Mike Kirchhoff from Kokomo, Auto Town, to create the Electric Vehicle Product Commission. And the work of that commission, we're now 3 years in, is all about making sure Indiana is prepared for our auto sector to evolve and be part of, as we've moved from just internal combustion engine manufacturing to also be building EVs in our state. And that the work of that commission, which has gone out to the auto industry for the last 3 years in the form of an annual report, has told the industry, hello, we are open for business. We're going to make sure our workforce is prepared, our existing manufacturing base is supported to pivot as needed, and that we can do all of the above when it comes to auto manufacturing. We have 100,000 good auto manufacturing jobs in our state. Let's maintain them. Let's grow them if we can, and keep that strong part of our economy strong.
Right. Talking about automobiles. Nice segue here, Carey. Good job to
All right.
Road funding.
Oh!
We had Representative James Earl Jones Pressel on the show.
And they sound so much alike.
Had him on the show. We talked about kind of the kickoff to that work. You all are both involved in that.
We are both on that committee.
Yep.
You decided you didn't want to hang out with us anymore?
It was the main reason. I was like, if I have to be with Earl any more than I already am, I will not survive it. So what's the update? Where are things at?
So
you guys
so
have
we're
solved
both
it,
on
right?
the committee.
30 billion.
Yeah, we've
got it.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
good.
So Earl is the ranking member on our committee, and so provides our leadership in that way. And I'm the sole member now from Marion County. Thank you, Blake.
I have to point out.
I just wanted to give you a chance to shine. That's all.
I have to point out, it was interesting that previous to this year, I was the Northwest Indiana guy, and it was 3 Indianapolis people on the committee.
Yeah.
So a major shift.
We've
So
shifted, yeah.
Indianapolis is all yours to take care of.
Yeah,
No
and
pressure.
it's a big challenge. So we're having this statewide road funding conversation, right? And we're having the incredibly big challenge of Marion County in particular, because Marion County has been underserved by the state road funding formula for decades, certainly if not longer. So how do we both solve the statewide problem, or start to solve it, and start to improve things for Marion County? Blake knows this as much as I do, and you've heard enough of it now as we've had these specific Marion County conversations, but we are putting a whole lot of money into the state road funding formula and getting very little back, just to keep it real simple. And we've got to start to change that story in strategic ways. Of course, our colleagues who are in the majority, in the supermajority, mostly represent those areas that are enjoying our money.
Yeah.
and it's not going to be as easy as just make it fair. Okay, that's not how the conversation is going to go. So we're trying real hard to find some real opportunities. And Representative Pressel, Jim, who you had on this just a couple weeks ago, is having really thoughtful conversations about that, and I appreciate his leadership.
So
as well.
a bill is moving. It's being adjusted. You guys are in conversations, and it's a lot. So the process continues.
Yeah.
The bill is in committee. We are, as of the recording of this, Monday, we will be back working on the
That's
funding
right.
bill. We'll be talking about amendments, working on getting a hopefully good version of it passed out of committee to then go to the House floor.
Yeah.
So a lot of stuff going on. And as Representative Hamilton said, some things in terms of Indianapolis, we know we need to make sure that those are done correctly.
Yeah.
Then we're also looking at, and I'm going to bring this up because it's not only where I am in Northwest Indiana, but here the T word has come up in tolling.
Yeah.
So we'll see how all that plays out.
Tomato? I was trying to figure out.
Turmeric?
Tomato?
Yeah, turmeric. Yeah.
I'm trying to reduce my swelling.
Yeah, that's right. Good move. A teaspoon a day. All right, I do want to touch on one bill from this week because it did get some attention and some time on the floor, and it was a bill around immigration. And there's obviously been lots of conversation about immigration reform, and notably, and important for us to be having a conversation, right? I think that there is an issue. There is issues of crime and whatnot that we should consider how to address. However, I think where this bill kind of falls apart is that I think it's been our position is that this is the federal government's responsibility. And so the bill this week essentially deputizes law enforcement agencies, local law enforcement agencies, to have a role with ICE in terms of reporting suspected undocumented immigrants to that agency. Falls apart a little bit on what probable cause is there and some other things. I guess I would just, ask for some reflections. I mean, it was a big deal this week. I obviously spoke on the floor. Earl, I think you spoke as well. Just kind of what should folks know about what happened this week?
So, kind of two takeaways from the bill, in addition to what you've already shared, and that is it's creating an extra regulatory burden for our local police forces across the state. Right? And they're already working really, really hard, doing so much for our communities to help keep them safe. And then you add this whole hurdle process. Yeah. We know that our local public safety community already has relationships with ICE and federal agencies around immigration and processes to make sure our communities stay safe. This regulatory burden is just that. That's not helpful to the process. It's not actually giving them more tools to do their jobs well.
And it's definitely not giving any funding to help them do it.
It's no funding, absolutely. But it's a signal bill.
Yeah.
And what that signal means to me is, there's a whole lot happening at the federal level right now, obviously. But we're kind of adding this extra layer of fear to our communities. Right. I mean, I've now heard stories in my community and many communities across the state of kids not going to school. Yeah. That's not good for Indiana, right? Parents not going to work. I mean, and so adding to the kind of fevered pitch without any real value, which there is no value in this bill, to keep our community safer, nothing in the bill does that. It's frustrating to me.
And I asked the author on the floor even just about the chilling effect, right? So, one of the things we know happens with bills like this that are not designed to do anything, but are designed to look like they're doing something, is that it sends a signal to communities that law enforcement is trying to build bridges to right now, right? The immigrant community is growing rapidly.
Yes.
And so law enforcement's trying to build these bridges so they have collaboration about solving crimes. And what we're doing with this bill is saying to documented and undocumented folks is that you can't trust law enforcement, right? Because their job is now to do the federal government's responsibilities. And I think it will stop folks from calling in when they witness a crime. It'll stop folks from collaborating when they're a victim of a crime. And the question I asked was, imagine you've got someone who's being human trafficked or is in a domestic violence situation, and they are afraid because of their status to now reach out to law enforcement, and their assailant continues to go around and do the things that they do. Correct. Is that an acceptable outcome of a policy like this? So, I think this isn't a lefty argument, right? We're talking about local government control, funding our law enforcement officers who are, I think as Victoria said on the floor, who are catching stray dogs and showing up to our schools and having to do work there, and they're responsible for everything and anything. And now we're saying you've got one more responsibility, but no money or training, or some training, but no money to actually cover the cost to do those things.
Yeah, and we have legislation we're putting in to try to make their life easier. And then, as you said, we're going to add something like this in, and you tapped on something that I talk about. So as someone who's Afro-Latino and has a lot of Mexican family members, you're correct. The fear is there. Even if you're born here, generations of being born here, and you're Latino, because that's really who this is aimed at, let's be real, there is fear of you getting pulled over, you getting discussed. And if not everyone, I do this, but not everyone carries around their driver's license as an example. So if you're walking around and don't have proof, what does that mean for you? I've had conversation with a friend who talked about another friend whom she walks around now with papers to show documentation that she is an American citizen. And so it's adding a lot of fear, and those relationships, as you talked about, it's going to make it not so safe for all of us, really, in the long run of this.
Well, we've got to find a way. I mean, we're coming off of an election, you're right, and this was obviously a fire starter sort of topic that you can argue how we handled it as a party probably wasn't where we needed to be. But at the end of the day, I think we've got to find a way to stop just parroting the furthest talking points on both sides.
Thank you. Yes.
And find a way to talk about these issues in a smart, thoughtful way that recognizes, you know what, violent criminals on the streets should be dealt with, right? Yeah. And if you have an undocumented person who's committing violent crime, we should absolutely address that.
No argument.
We are not arguing for anything other than let's actually just be smart about it and not drain resources from local communities that are already starved and find a way to solve problems, not talk about how we think we're going to solve problems. It's all we're really trying to get at.
Correct. Let's do, again, what's best for the citizens of the state.
Yeah.
Well, we're almost out of time, I suspect.
I think so.
Wait, time check, Jacob. Jacob, where are we at?
We are at 30 minutes.
We are.
So
out of time.
To wrap it up?
One more question. Go ahead, Earl.
All right. So I actually do have one more question for you. I want to go back to the fact that you are top 3 leadership. We as Democrats are the super minority.
We are.
But you get some things done. So how do you, being a Democrat in Indiana on the downside of the super minority, how do you be effective, and what lesson do you have for the rest of us?
Several of our members have bills moving right now. I know you have one, right?
2.
Two. I mean, that's great.
This is not a show where we brag.
She asked the question. I answered it. He's still mad about that lemonade stand thing.
You're supposed to say you're supposed to say it was on sale.
It was on sale.
Oh gosh.
You're regretting saying yes.
Not at all. It is actually quite entertaining to be with you both here. But
we're kind of funny.
Yeah, you kind of are. To answer your question, well, I'm going to just give an example. So right now, the bill that I'm moving, knock on wood, that will hopefully continue to move, came from a meeting in the community. Recycle Force is an organization here in Indianapolis. It's called an employment social enterprise. There are a handful of these across the state. Recycle Force is the most impactful to date, the largest, longest serving. What they do is employ ex-offenders, and employment social enterprises can also serve veterans who are struggling, or other communities, maybe folks who are coming out of an addictive situation and trying to get back into society. Recycle Force serves ex-offenders and provides job training opportunities with really a strong wraparound of services to make sure they can navigate that post-incarceration world where there's a lot of stuff to turn in and bank accounts to set up and housing to secure and transportation and all of these things. along with like high quality job skills and workforce training. These organizations are eligible for federal dollars. And in Indiana today, we're not securing as many of those dollars as we could. So the legislation codifies the federal definition of employment social enterprises in state code. This is a relatively minor bill, small bill, if you will. It's 2 pages. There's no deletions. It's simple language. But it will allow Indiana, it will make it easier for these organizations to thrive in our state. So it's a workforce bill.
Yeah.
It's a reduced recidivism, improved public safety bill. But it's pretty simple, and I have bipartisan support. And I think the bills that are moving have those characteristics. So we don't necessarily make as much progress as we would like, although we do on the budget, but we do impact the budget in positive ways. But we can get really important public policies through along the way that are common sense and that just happen to come from us.
Unless you're Carey and you're walking to work, your commute's probably over, so we probably have to call it from there. Thanks for tuning in, Carey, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for hanging out with us this morning, and thanks to all of you, as always, for continuing to listen to us inexplicably, I might add. But thanks for being a part of the show. Obviously, subscribe, leave us a comment, rate the stars, do all the things you do on a podcast, and we'll be back with another exciting episode before you know it.